After securing a decisive victory over the remnants of Pompey's forces at the Battle of Munda in 45 BC, Julius Caesar emerged as the sole authority in Rome. With this triumph, he was declared Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life, a title that underscored his complete dominance. While most of his rivals had been eliminated, Sextus Pompey, son of Pompey the Great, still controlled Sicily, a critical region for Rome due to its grain production. Rather than plunging into another conflict, Caesar preferred diplomacy, hoping to broker a peaceful agreement with Sextus. Rome's grain supply wasn't under immediate threat, thanks to Caesar's alliance with Cleopatra, whose fertile Nile delta kept the capital well fed. With domestic stability more or less assured, Caesar shifted focus to his long-held ambition, launching a campaign against Parthia. Meanwhile, his popularity with the public soared. He distributed food and money generously, staged public spectacles, and forgave tenants unpaid rent. These moves not only boosted his standing, but also cemented the loyalty of Rome's masses. Caesar didn't forget the soldiers who had stood beside him during his years of conquest. Veterans were rewarded with parcels of land across various provinces like North Africa, Spain, and Greece, while the more capable and younger legions were retained for future battles. These forces, loyal and battle-hardened, were destined to accompany him to Parthia. By elevating his troops and strategically placing them in key territories, Caesar not only reinforced his military backing, but also tightened his grip over the empire. But his consolidation of power didn't stop there. To weaken the entrenched senatorial class, especially the conservative optimates, he expanded the Senate dramatically. Hundreds of new senators were appointed from the provinces, including his loyal military officers and regional elites. This tripled the Senate's size, transforming it from an aristocratic institution into a loyal apparatus of Caesar's rule. Though framed as reform, this move alarmed many. While the new senators owed their position to Caesar, the old aristocracy viewed the maneuver as a threat to the Republic's traditional balance of power, a calculated reshaping of Roman governance into something far more centralized and personal. Despite his widespread popularity among the common people and soldiers, Caesar's growing influence stirred deep unease within the Roman aristocracy. Many of his former adversaries, especially those loyal to Pompey and aligned with the Optimates, began to suspect that Caesar's reforms concealed a more dangerous ambition, the dismantling of the Republic itself. Whispers spread through the Senate that he aimed not just for supreme power but for kingship. In a society that took pride in having overthrown its last king centuries earlier, even the word rex ad king was politically toxic. The Romans had built their identity on resisting monarchy since expelling Tarquin the Proud in 509 BC. As such, the mere suggestion that Caesar could aspire to become a king was inflammatory and dangerous. Historical precedent weighed heavily on this fear. In earlier times, Marcus Manlius Capitolinus, a war hero, was executed on suspicion of royal ambition. This context made Caesar's actions, whether intentional or not, increasingly suspect, and every ceremonial honor he accepted was scrutinized through the lens of ancient trauma and Republican anxiety. The signs were difficult to ignore. Caesar had accepted a series of extravagant honors. He was named Father of the Fatherland, and public festivals, sacrifices, and theatrical shows were regularly held in his name. Instead of using a traditional senator's chair during meetings, he began sitting on an elevated golden ivory throne, likely to alleviate his chronic back pain, but it nonetheless sent an unsettling message. His public attire also raised eyebrows. The purple robe, red, boots, and golden laurel wreath were symbols of triumph, but to many, they resembled the regalia of a monarch. Some believed the laurel crown served the practical purpose of hiding his baldness, yet the perception it generated only fueled the fire. At one session, Caesar remained seated instead of rising to greet the Senate, a gesture widely interpreted as disrespectful. Rumors swirled that he planned to marry Cleopatra, move the capital to Alexandria, and crown their son, Caesarion, as his heir. While these claims may have been exaggerated or even baseless, Caesar's refusal to address them directly gave his opponents room to speculate. To the elite, the line between dictator and king was beginning to blur and perhaps vanish. As Caesar's influence continued to grow, so did the tension around him, a slow build toward an inevitable breaking point. And speaking of growth, we have a humble goal of our own here, reaching 1,000 subscribers by June 30th. If you've enjoyed the story so far and want to support more content like this, hitting that subscribe button helps us immensely. Tensions came to a head with a series of highly publicized incidents that seemed to confirm Rome's worst fears. One of the most symbolic moments occurred when a golden diadem, a traditional emblem of monarchy, was placed on a statue of Caesar in the Forum. The tribunes of the people, Gaius Appidius Marullus and Lucius Caecilius Flavus, promptly had it removed, declaring the act a veiled attempt to crown Caesar. This sparked public debate and rekindled anxieties over monarchical ambition. Things escalated even further on January 26, 44 BC, during a public procession along the Via Appia. Members of the crowd began shouting, "Rex!" calling Caesar king. With practiced cleverness, he deflected the chants by saying, "Caesar, not Rex," a wordplay on his name and title. However, when the tribunes moved to arrest the man who first shouted it, Caesar reacted harshly. He publicly accused the tribunes of inciting unrest, stripped them of their office, and removed them from the Senate, a stunning move that undermined the sanctity of their positions and outraged many citizens. This act eroded some of the public goodwill he had worked so hard to cultivate and painted him as a leader who no longer respected republican boundaries. The final and perhaps most unsettling episode took place during the Lupercalia festival on February 15, 44 BC. In full view of a large crowd, Mark Antony, Caesar's co-consul and loyal ally, dramatically approached him and attempted to place a diadem on his head, declaring that the people offered him kingship through Antony's hand. The audience's reaction was tepid, uncertain. Caesar, sensing the mood, refused the offer. Antony tried again, and again Caesar declined. Eventually, Caesar took the diadem and offered it to the temple of Jupiter, proclaiming that only the god had the right to be king of the Romans. While this gesture was applauded, suspicions remained. Many believed the entire event had been staged to test public sentiment, a trial balloon for monarchy. In this light, Caesar's rejection of the crown looked less like humility and more like strategic theater. Some even spread the version that Antony meant to offer it as a sacrifice, but Caesar reached for it too eagerly. These growing perceptions, true or not, solidified the belief among Rome's elite that Caesar was moving dangerously close to absolute power. Within weeks, that belief would turn deadly. By the end of February 44 BC, unease within the Senate had hardened into conspiracy. A group of senators, numbering over 60, began organizing a plan to assassinate Caesar. While the names of only about 20 have survived history, the most prominent among them were Gaius Cassius Longinus and Marcus Junius Brutus. Both men had been on the opposing side during the Civil War, but were later pardoned by Caesar, who restored their political careers and awarded them prestigious positions. Yet despite his generosity, both came to view Caesar's continued accumulation of power as an existential threat to the Republic. Their distrust deepened with each new title he accepted, each symbolic gesture that hinted at monarchy. Personal motivations also played a role. Some conspirators feared being sidelined or forgotten under Caesar's regime. Others were disillusioned by promises of power or influence that never materialized. A few simply resented the way Caesar had reshaped Roman politics in his image. Whatever their reasons, the conspirators were united by one objective: to eliminate Caesar before he could crown himself or be crowned king. Among the conspirators were not only political figures, but also military men who had once marched under Caesar's banner. One of the most notable was Decimus Junius Brutus, a former legate and one of Caesar's most trusted generals during the Gallic campaigns. His participation was especially shocking, given the honors and responsibilities Caesar had bestowed upon him. Historians have long debated what led Decimus to betray his former commander. Some suggest that his close ties to Marcus Brutus, who became the philosophical heart of the conspiracy, played a role. The plot also included other former officers: Gaius Trebonius, Servius Galba, Lucius Tillius Cimber, Lucius Minucius Basileus, and even Publius Servilius Casca, one of Caesar's oldest allies. According to legend, Casca would be the first to strike. As their numbers grew, the conspirators held secret meetings to refine their plan. Their original idea was to attack Caesar in the Roman Forum, a public space full of symbolic meaning, but concerns about the presence of Caesar's supporters made that option too risky. Instead, they set their sights on a more controlled environment, the next session of the Senate, where Caesar would be surrounded by men he assumed were his peers, not his executioners. While the majority of the conspirators agreed on the need to kill Caesar, there was fierce debate over whether his closest allies should be targeted as well. Some, particularly Cassius, argued for a broader purge that would include Mark Antony and Marcus Lepidus, men seen as Caesar's political heirs and potential avengers. But Marcus Brutus, whose philosophical ideals were rooted in Stoicism and Republican virtue, resisted this path. He insisted that their act be viewed not as a violent coup, but as a righteous intervention, a clean surgical strike meant to restore liberty, not plunge Rome into chaos. He believed that killing Caesar alone would send a powerful symbolic message that no one, no matter how beloved or powerful, could place themselves above the Republic. His idealism won out, and the plan was finalized. The assassination would take place during a Senate meeting at the theater of Pompey, a location steeped in bitter irony as it bore the name of Caesar's defeated rival. On that day, the conspirators would strike decisively, counting on the absence of Caesar's bodyguards in what was traditionally considered a sanctuary of politics and debate. Despite ominous signs, Caesar showed little concern for his safety in the days leading up to the attack. Friends and allies urged him repeatedly to travel with armed guards, even suggesting a small contingent of loyal legionaries accompany him to Senate sessions. Caesar refused every offer. His response was both stoic and fatalistic. It was better to die once than to live in constant fear of death. That defiance masked a growing storm of warning signs. His wife, Calpurnia, had a disturbing dream the night before the fateful meeting, a vision of Caesar's blood staining the floor of their home. On the morning of March 15th, religious officials declared the day inauspicious based on their readings of omens, and Caesar, unusually cautious, decided not to attend the Senate. This nearly unraveled the entire plot. With Caesar scheduled to depart for his Parthian campaign in just 2 days, and with his loyal troops ready to march, the conspirators feared they would lose access to him entirely. In desperation, they sent Decimus Brutus, the man Caesar trusted deeply, to persuade him. Decimus appealed to Caesar's pride, warning that canceling would offend the Senate and spark rumors of cowardice. Against his better judgment, Caesar agreed to go. Even as omens warned him and allies urged caution, Caesar pressed forward, unaware that the next few moments would define history. If you're finding this story as gripping as we do, feel free to like the video and follow the channel. It's a simple way to keep exploring the turning points of ancient history with us. Multiple chances to avoid death slipped through Caesar's fingers that morning. According to ancient accounts, a friend who had uncovered details of the plot rushed to deliver a warning, but arrived moments too late. Caesar had already departed. Another messenger, also bearing critical information, missed him by mere minutes. Perhaps the most tragic detail is the note said to have been handed to Caesar on his way to the Senate, a folded parchment detailing the names of the conspirators and their plan. But Caesar, occupied with other documents, tucked it away unread. Even earlier, the soothsayer Spurina had warned him to beware the Ides of March, and as Caesar passed him in the street that very morning, he reportedly quipped, "The Ides of March have come." The seer replied with chilling calm, "Yes, but they have not yet passed." The irony of that exchange would echo through history. Despite all the omens, warnings, and second chances, Caesar continued on toward the Senate, either oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the fate that waited for him beneath the statue of his old enemy. Because the traditional curia was under renovation, the Senate session was held in the Theater of Pompey, an architectural symbol of Caesar's past rivalry. The conspirators gathered early, their weapons concealed beneath their togas, rehearsing mentally the parts they were about to play. Mark Antony, whose physical strength and loyalty to Caesar posed a significant threat to the plot, arrived first. To neutralize him, Gaius Trebonius, himself a former general under Caesar, intercepted Antony and engaged him in an urgent conversation outside the chamber. Antony, unaware of the deception, followed Trebonius and was kept away long enough for the assassins to act. Meanwhile, Caesar entered the hall and took his designated seat, positioned directly beneath a statue of Pompey, as if fate had chosen to add a final layer of poetic cruelty. One of the conspirators approached him with a formal request to pardon his exiled brother, a calculated ruse. As Caesar responded, the man grabbed his toga, a move that startled him. "Why, this is violence!" Caesar exclaimed. In that instant, Publius Servilius Casca struck the first blow. It was shallow, a mere wound to the shoulder, but it signaled the others. Daggers flashed in a whirlwind of betrayal. As Caesar rose in shock, trying to fend off his attackers, another blade pierced him, followed by another and another. The chamber erupted in chaos as senators, men he had once promoted, pardoned, and trusted, took turns stabbing him in a frenzy of coordinated violence. He tried to escape, but was quickly overwhelmed by the sheer number of assailants. According to some accounts, with the last of his strength, Caesar pulled the edge of his toga over his face, a final act of dignity in the face of betrayal and death. The phrase, "et tu, brute," often cited as his dying words, is a dramatic invention of Shakespeare. Ancient sources like Suetonius mention Caesar speaking in Greek to Brutus, possibly uttering "kai su teknon," "you too, my child," though this too is disputed. Plutarch claims Caesar said nothing at all, only groaning as the blade struck. When the attack ended, his body lay lifeless, bearing 23 stab wounds. But only one had been fatal. The rest were superficial, symbolic, not meant to kill quickly, but to show that no single man bore the blame. It was a collective judgment, delivered by the very hands he had once lifted into power. In the immediate aftermath, the assassins believed they would be hailed as heroes, liberators of the Republic. They had imagined that Rome, relieved to be free of a would-be monarch, would celebrate their act as noble and necessary. But reality struck with brutal clarity. The Roman people, far from rejoicing, responded with mourning, confusion, and anger. Caesar was not seen as a tyrant by the masses. To them, he had been a benefactor, a man who distributed food, canceled debts, and rewarded veterans. The city was gripped by sorrow. And then came the emotional climax, Mark Antony's funeral speech. As Caesar's blood-stained toga was held aloft, Antony described each wound with theatrical intensity. He read, "Caesar's will allowed, revealing generous gifts left to the citizens, money, and public access to his gardens." The effect was electric. The crowd, already tense, erupted into fury. Grief turned to rage. Riots broke out as mobs stormed the streets. Caesar's body, instead of being laid to rest in the family tomb, was carried by the people to the Roman Forum, where it was burned on a makeshift pyre. Furniture, branches, clothing, anything that would burn, was thrown onto the flames. It became not just a funeral, but a rebellion. The conspirators, who had expected parades in their honor, were now fugitives. The reaction from the people of Rome was swift and hostile. Far from celebrating the supposed salvation of the Republic, the masses condemned the killing as a betrayal. Fear spread among the senators who had taken part, and many fled the city within days. Some sought refuge in the provinces, hoping to regroup and find sympathy among regional governors or military commanders. Others attempted to sway the army, believing the disciplined legions would support the restoration of the old order. But most soldiers remained loyal to Caesar's memory. He had, after all, treated them not as pawns, but as brothers in arms. Their loyalty would become a decisive factor in what followed. With public sentiment turning against the assassins, Rome was once again on the brink of civil war. The very outcome the conspirators hoped to avoid, the descent into political chaos, now loomed larger than ever. Rather than saving the Republic, their actions had plunged it into greater uncertainty and unrest. The dream of a restored Senate-led government quickly faded in the face of street violence, popular fury, and the vacuum of power left behind. In the days that followed, Mark Antony maneuvered skillfully to seize the moment. As Caesar's closest political partner and co-consul, he took control of the situation with both emotional appeal and strategic calculation. His funeral speech had already ignited the people's anger, and he continued to present himself as the rightful guardian of Caesar's legacy. Antony used Caesar's will not just to curry favor with the people, but also to frame the conspirators as enemies of the Roman public, not just political idealists. Soon after, Antony aligned himself with another rising figure, Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir. Though young and untested, Octavian carried Caesar's name and bloodline. Together, they rallied the public and mobilized troops, vowing to bring justice to those who had stained the Republic with blood. In a short time, the tide turned. Support for the assassins dwindled as civil unrest increased. The Senate, caught between competing factions, struggled to maintain control. What had begun as a supposed liberation was now unraveling into a familiar pattern. Civil war, driven not by principles, but by power. And in that chaos, a new political reality was taking shape, one where personal ambition, popular support, and military force would redefine Rome forever. As conflict escalated, many of the conspirators met grim ends. Some died in battle, trying to rally loyalist forces against the tide of Caesar's supporters. Others were hunted down, executed, or chose suicide over capture. Marcus Junius Brutus, the man once considered the moral center of the plot, took his own life after suffering defeat in battle at Philippi in 42 BC. His death marked the symbolic end of the Republican dream that had motivated the assassination. Rome, instead of returning to its senatorial traditions, plunged deeper into a cycle of vengeance and military domination. The hopes for a restored republic faded quickly as new power blocks emerged, led by Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, eventually forming the Second Triumvirate. Their reign, far from embodying republican ideals, was marked by proscriptions, executions, and political purges. Ironically, the violence used to prevent tyranny had only cleared the path for a new form of it. Caesar's murder didn't end authoritarian rule. It accelerated its transformation. With the Republic shattered, Rome would soon witness the rise of an empire, one ruled by an emperor bearing Caesar's name, sanctioned by the people, and legitimized by blood. The assassination of Julius Caesar remains one of the most iconic political killings in history, not just for its brutality, but for its tragic miscalculation. The very men who struck him down believed they were preserving liberty, but they underestimated both Caesar's popularity and the consequences of his absence. They failed to foresee how power would flow not back to the Senate, but to those willing to fill the void with force. Mark Antony and Octavian did exactly that, harnessing public emotion, leveraging military power, and turning Caesar's death into a tool for their own rise. The Republic was no longer a functioning political ideal, but a name used to justify personal ambition. The crowd that once burned Caesar's body, in a fury of mourning, would later cheer Octavian as Augustus, the first emperor. History would not remember the conspirators as saviors of the Republic, but as men who triggered its final collapse. Their legacy is not one of triumph, but of failure, a reminder that noble intentions, when paired with poor judgment and underestimated consequences, can yield the opposite of what was intended. In the years that followed, Rome was reshaped not by idealists, but by power brokers who understood how to wield loyalty, symbolism, and fear. Octavian, though just a teenager when Caesar died, proved to be a master strategist. He outmaneuvered Antony, turned the people's grief into devotion, and used the legacy of his adopted father as a political weapon. By 27 BC, he stood unchallenged and accepted the title Augustus, ushering in the Roman Empire. The very institutions the conspirators hoped to protect were either dissolved or repurposed to serve imperial rule. The Senate became ceremonial, elections hollow, and republican traditions preserved only in appearance. Caesar's assassination, far from preventing dictatorship, became the catalyst for a system where absolute power would no longer be questioned, only inherited. And in a twist rich with historical irony, future emperors would be crowned not with fear, but with celebration, often invoking Caesar's name as justification. The dagger meant to stop one man from becoming king, instead carved a path for centuries of emperors. And yet the story of Caesar's fall endures not only as a lesson in political miscalculation, but as a profound reflection on leadership, loyalty, and legacy. He was not perfect, far from it. His ambition, his disregard for republican norms, and his hunger for control made him feared among the elite. But he was also a man of vision, courage, and reform. To the people, he was a protector, a provider, and a symbol of change. His murder was not the end of a tyrant. It was the silencing of a transformative figure whose shadow would stretch across history. The betrayal he suffered reminds us that power, even when used for reform, can inspire fear in those unwilling to lose their influence. And the chaos that followed is a warning that destroying a leader does not destroy the forces that empowered him. Julius Caesar died not as a king, but as a man undone by his peers, men who failed to understand that real change does not die with the body. It lives on, in memory, in consequence, and in the empires that rise from the ashes of shattered ideals. Now that you've seen the full picture, the ambition, the betrayal, the unintended legacy, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think the conspirators were right? Did Caesar deserve his fate? Leave a comment below. Your perspective helps us improve and dive deeper into stories that matter.